Hello there, welcome back to Mindful May. My name is May, and today's project is a full-length shirred dress. I got this fabric from a thrift store a while back. It's kind of a floral, almost prairie-looking fabric. It's 100% cotton, and it's super soft, and I had enough to make a full-length Maxi style dress, and I'm excited to do some shirring on the bodice as it's a very flattering style. I will not be teaching you how to shirr fabric today, but you can totally YouTube that. There's tons of videos. That's how I learned to do it, and once you start getting the hang of it, it's pretty simple and slightly addicting. Let's talk about the materials you'll need for this project. You'll need your fabric of choice. I probably have 3 yards here. You need matching thread, your measuring tape, scissors of course, some elastic, and then some elastic thread, again for the shirring. Once you've got that, we can start this project.
I have got all of my measurements mapped out and ready to go. And first I will be cutting out the neckline and armholes of the front and back panels. I'm going in on a folded piece of fabric, 5 inches in for my neckline opening, 2.5 inches deep, which gives us about a 5-inch scoop for the neckline. Next, I am making the strap, which is 3 inches wide. And now moving down to the armhole. I am first doing a 12.5 inch measurement for my chest. And then going up from there to my strap mark. Gives me a 9-inch armhole. And then I'm going to be tapering my measurements a little wider. So I'm going from 12.5 inches, a few inches down, widening it to 13.5, and then a few inches down, 14.5. So I am cutting out at 14.5 inches on the fold, all the way down to the bottom of the dress. Now I'm cutting it out. For my length before the tier is added, I decided on 41 inches, and that is measured from the very top of the shoulder all the way down. Here's my first panel. It looks ridiculously wide, but we will be adding that shirring, which will gather it in later. If you've seen my videos, I do this a lot. On another folded piece of fabric, I am just cutting out an identical piece, mirroring the first piece we cut out. Going all the way to the bottom, finding that 41-inch mark, and cutting there. So now we have 2 identical panels. For the front panel, I just want the neckline to dip down a little bit lower. I am popping a 1-inch mark here and starting from the top of the shoulder, just trimming down. Next, I'm going to cut out the neckline binding. If you've seen my videos before, I make a lot of my own bias binding, which just means that we are cutting out on the 45-degree angle line, which is the stretchiest angle of fabric, so it makes it great for finishing any curved edges like necklines or armholes. I cut out 2 pieces that equaled my 29-inch neckline, so I have a 15.5-inch piece and a 13.5-inch piece. And for the width of these, I just went with the width of my measuring tape, which I believe is about 1 inch. Just going to finish off squaring the edges. Then I'm going to cut out my sleeves. This is actually a scrap. This is all I had left, so my sleeve plans actually changed from what I had initially imagined. More on that later. And I'm just going to cut this long panel in half and use what I have left for my sleeves. Starting with this piece with a fold on the top, I'm going to use my front panel as a template to cut out the armhole. So laying it on the folded piece, I'm just going to sketch around. And as I get to the bottom, it will kind of taper off into a curve. You'll see her as I cut it out and lay it open. Then I will lay this piece on my second sleeve and cut out the identical panel. Here's how it looks open wide. Now I'm going to prepare my machine for shirring. So I've used elastic thread in videos before, but as I said in the intro, I'm not going to teach you how to do it today, but I'll show you how I go about doing it. So you do need to hand wind the elastic in your bobbin. I know from experience that you want to do this very loosely, so don't pull tight. And I go until I have about a full bobbin. I'm going to pop out the bobbin cage, take out my old thread, pop in the elastic thread, and then for the measurements of my shirring lines, I'm going to go 4 inches from the top of the shoulder and draw a line across my panel. This is where I want my first shirred line to start. And then I want 10 inches of shirring. So from that first line I made, popping down 10 inches and drawing another line there. Taking it to the machine and starting at the very corner, I'm going to just sew a straight line, following the line that I created with my pencil. Pop my needle in, rotate my fabric. I'm going to machine stitch 3 stitches down. 1 more. Pick up the foot and then turn my fabric. And then I'm going to just follow the same line that I started with, just trying to run as parallel as possible. You can sketch lines out to follow along, but the shirring is really forgiving, so I knew if I went a little sloppy, it would turn out okay. And 29 rows later, my first panel is done. It took quite a long time, and now I will do the second. So here are my 2 pieces. I'm going to attach them at the shoulder seam. Facing my 2 panels, right sides facing each other, I'm going to pin at the shoulder seams and sew 1 straight line to connect it. And I'll take it to the machine, and here it is connected. Next, I am going to go about putting the binding together, taking the 2 strips I made earlier, placing them with the good sides facing each other, or the brightest sides of your fabric. And I'm just going to sew a simple line on both sides. So my binding is complete. I'm going to attach it with the good sides facing. So the good side of my binding is facing the good side of my dress, and I'm going to pin it all along the neck opening. I'm doing my best to attach it as close to the neckline as possible. Here is the first step done. This is something I also do in a lot of my other videos. This is a hidden binding, so I'm going to double roll the binding to the inside of the dress and pin that down in place. So I take 1 roll in to cover the open seam, and then another roll to pull it all inside of the dress. Here's how it looks a little closer up. It just gives it a really nice, clean, finished look on the neckline. I'll continue to pin that all the way around. And taking it to the machine, this time sewing closest to the edge of the binding. I will admit this did take me 2 tries. The first time I did my neckline, I had stretched the fabric as I sewed. I would not recommend this. Next, I'm going to add the sleeves. Flipping my dress open and my sleeve piece open, I'm going to pin right sides together, finding the edge of my sleeve, pinning at one end, finding the other end, and then pinning evenly all the way around the rest of the sleeve. So we will sew a line all along here, and this is how it will look when we're done. I always like to flip it out and make sure I'm sewing it on the right direction. Taking it to the machine with my little pin pot and sewing all along the sleeve. Making sure to catch the very ends of my shirring. I don't want them to be exposed on the other side. I've attached both sleeves and the dress is really coming together. Next, I'm going to flip it inside out and sew along the side seams of the dress, really bringing it together. Starting at the wrist, pinning right sides together. My next pin will be in the armpit, and then pinning all the way down the shirred edge, all the way down the side of the dress. We're going to sew down the wrist, sew the armpit, and then down the side panel. At the machine, starting with a forward and back stitch, we are sewing a straight line until we get to the armpit. I will place my needle down, pivot the fabric, so then we are sewing down the rest of the dress. And here she is all connected. Next step is to take care of the sleeves. I'm going to sew a wide stitch all the way around the edge of my sleeve, and then I'm going to be adding these cuffs. I cut out 2 with some scrap fabric that I had at 11 by 3 inches, and I'm going to sew them right sides together, just a straight line across. Taking it to the machine, I switch my stitch to a wider stitch, the widest on my machine, and sewed as close to the edge as I can. Turning it back to a regular stitch, I am sewing that cuff. And this was not part of my plan initially. I had wanted an elastic sleeve, but I didn't have enough fabric for the sleeve, so I made do and added a cuff instead. And now I am pulling on that string. This will give us such a cute ruffled sleeve look. I'm just going to continue pulling the thread, ruching the fabric around until it is the same width as one of the cuffs. And doing the same thing on the other side. You're pulling one string. I tend to pull the lower string, which would be coming from the bobbin. I just find it seems to slip easier. And then we will be turning the dress inside out to start attaching the cuff. I'm going to take the cuff, turn it also inside out, place it over the sleeve, line up the side seams, and pin them together. Continuing to pin all the way around the wrist. You're going to sew it all together. Turning it back to a regular stitch and removing this extra panel from my machine just so I can really get into this tiny sleeve. And then starting at the seam and sewing all the way around, being careful not to catch the other side of the sleeve. It's easy to do with such a little tunnel that we're sewing around. So just take it slow. And this is how it will look when we're done. I'm going to pull the dress so the good sides are facing out again. And step 2 for our cuff is to double roll towards the seam that we just made. It's going to cover up what we just sewed, and we'll pin it into place, pin it all the way around. And we'll take it to the machine and sew it on. Again, the sleeve is a little tricky, just take it slow. Make sure you're not sewing 2 sides of your sleeve together. And I'm sewing as close to the edge as I can. And lastly, we have to add our ruffled tier. Mine is 9 inches high and 82 inches long. First step for the tier is to take this long strip and sew it right sides together to create one big loop. After you've sewn it together, you're going to sew one loose stitch all the way around to create our ruffled tier. Switching it to a loose stitch. When we are making a loose stitch, we do not do a forward and back stitch because we want to be able to pull the thread through the holes that we are creating with the machine. Once I have sewn this, again taking my bobbin string, gently pulling and moving the fabric along that thread. This takes quite a bit of time with my 82 inches of fabric here, so let's skip all that until I have it the width of the bottom of my dress. Once it's there, I will flip it up onto the dress. Again, matching the side seams, matching them up, and starting the pinning process here. I'm taking it all the way around the remainder of the bottom of the dress, and we'll sew it together. Sewing on a ruffled tier can be a little tricky. You might have to maneuver things around. This is a slow process, but again, the tier and the ruffles are very forgiving. So a lot of times I just create folds in the fabric, sew right over them, and it turns out all right. And here she is, all done. I love it so much.
Thanks so much for watching with me today. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. And then subscribe on the next page. And I'll see you next time. Cheers!